Hey mermaids, it's Marielle from AquaMermaid, and today I have a special guest,
Astrid.
She's an underwater model and she will share with us how she poses in the water, some breath holding tricks, how to deal with water in your nose, in your eyes, and how to look beautiful doing it. Then let's do it.
Hey, I'm Astrid Kallsen and we're gonna swim in this pool and show you a little bit about underwater posing. My experience in modeling, I got started in art nude modeling about 4 years ago, and then about 3 years ago I ended up in underwater modeling. And I kind of immediately went with underwater modeling and modeling in a mermaid tail underwater. My first time modeling underwater, I didn't have a lot of swimming experience and I didn't even know if I could open my eyes underwater, but went ahead and just decided to try it and do it. And it ended up feeling really natural and I really enjoyed it and got some amazing photos and have continued to do it and get better in the last 3 years. And now I am teaching underwater posing workshops for everyone from inexperienced people who don't necessarily model to experienced models who just need a little bit more help controlling their movements underwater. 3 good tricks for modeling underwater that I've learned. Always let go of all of your air. This is usually a bigger deal if you're modeling in a pool or in the shallow end of open water, springs and such. Not so great if you're in the ocean or free diving, you need as much air as you can get, but in a pool you usually let out all of your air so that way you can sink a little bit more. Some people will find that their buoyancy is a little different, so some people don't have to let out any air in order to sink, and some people will never sink no matter how much air they let out. But that leads me to tip number 2, is the biggest thing to do underwater is just to relax, and you'll have a lot of pressure from your body telling you to breathe, get to the surface, that you're gonna die, but it's a very calming experience to realize how capable you are underwater and how long you can really survive underwater. And it's as you find your strength underwater and your ability to relax and cope in those scary and dangerous situations that you realize just how natural being underwater is for people. And tip number 3, to move as slowly as you can underwater. Usually it's when you start to panic that you start moving around a lot, and when you move around a lot you find that you can't control yourself quite as well underwater. Usually you end up floating to the top, or you can't make it to the top in a very elegant or graceful way, or in a way that's helpful. The slower you move underwater, kind of the more power you find in all of your movements. I get asked this question a lot, how to deal with having water in your nose. It's a horribly uncomfortable situation, but I think of it a lot as if you've ever accidentally cut your fingernail a little too closely and you feel that like discomfort under your nail of the air touching, and it's a really uncomfortable and weird sensation, but you get over it. And I would say the same is true with water up your nose. So for the first few times it's really scary, it's really discomforting, and then you kind of start to get used to it and recognize the sensation. I would say this can be very different in very, very chlorinated pools or salt water, and I mean very salty water like the ocean. That can be a little disconcerting, but in the end you kind of get used to it and recognize the sensation. For me, usually if the pool is overly chlorinated or I'm in the ocean, I do sneeze a lot more, just from the tingling sensation, but it is just one of those things that you kind of get used to after doing it for a little bit. In general, I don't use a nose plug, though I have seen that sinus savers can be really good for modeling underwater because they're not very visible and they can protect your nose in some cases, especially if you get the right size. They're not always 100% guaranteed to work, but they do help. You can also try nose plugs, but they are a lot more visible and harder to edit out in photos, but they do work very well and are very comfortable. So I kind of suggest using nose plugs if you're practicing underwater and you just want to focus more on the movement rather than the comfort level. but typically I don't end up using a nose plug at all, and have just figured out ways to get around needing a nose plug. So there's ways to keep water from going up your nose and down your throat by making a nasal sound with your mouth. Certain vocal sounds in the English language, at least, can close up that nasal cavity and keep any sort of air from your nasal cavity and away from your throat, so it creates the separation between the two. That way when you go underwater, you might get water up your nasal cavity here, or tunnel, or whatever you want to call it, but it's not going to go down your throat, and it's not going to end up killing you. And then when you get up to the surface, you can usually just blow it out, and I think of it as a way to clean out all of my sinuses. I can breathe really well after doing a few underwater shoots. Specific sounds for keeping or for closing your nasal cavities are the nasal kind of syllables. So these are things like the n and m, which you can feel it even kind of in the back of your throat, where you're lifting up your tongue, just the very back. If you try really hard to specifically lift up your tongue, you're probably not going to do it unless you know exactly what you're looking for. But if you try making an in sound, your tongue will just do it naturally, and you can kind of feel that it closes off. And if you try practicing this underwater, and I've even done this in a bathtub, you'll notice that you get a lot of water right up your nose, and it just kind of sits there. And it doesn't go down your throat, it doesn't like do any of those drowning sensation feelings, and then when you come right back up and out into the surface, you can blow it right out of your nose. Definitely in sounds, that's generally what I advise, and usually won't make a sound when you're underwater, and you don't have to actually make the sound, you just have to do the movement with your mouth. So we could try doing something upside down so that way you're staring up into the surface. So some of the positions that I'm doing underwater are, I enjoy getting close to the surface of the water so that way I can get photos with my reflection in the pool's surface. It's also a great way to get a lot of light on your face if you're doing something in the dark, or in a darker setting. So it's very hard to get close to the surface. You kind of have to let out just enough air so that way you're right below the surface but not completely sinking down, and you don't want too much air because otherwise you're constantly bobbing into the surface. And in some cases, depending on the salinity of the water or my own personal buoyancy of the day, I will either I'll get myself all the way to the bottom and slowly let myself rise closer to the surface, or I'll be on the surface of the water and slowly let out more of my air until I've sunken just enough. And you can kind of play with the air in your body and controlling your own buoyancy by letting out air slowly, and you'll see just how much you sink. Because what's keeping you and making you rise up to the surface is the air in your lungs. So you'll always notice that usually it's your lungs and your head or your back that bobs up to the surface first. So that's a great way to kind of find your own, where you want to be in the water column, or how far down in the water that you want to go. And you'll notice this can be very different in shallow water versus in deeper water. Another position that I did was I laid down on the bottom of the pool, and this can be very different if you're laying on your back versus laying on your stomach. Laying on your stomach can be a little easier just because you don't have to deal with the water going up your nose aspect, but it's just about as easy as it is to lay on your back underwater. Buoyancy wise, you usually have to let out all of your air unless you're in a very deep pool or body of water, and then you have to be very still, because the more movement that you create as you're getting closer to the bottom of the surface, more water is getting in between you and the ground. So it takes a lot of calm, stillness, and kind of a meditative mind to lay or sit on the bottom of the pool. So you'll see that I am doing a little bit of unusual breathing as I'm going into the water. In some cases, this helps me remain calm, is getting in all of my air, letting it all out, and then doing this again until I feel ready to go into the water. If you've ever done free diving, you might do this as well. Usually when you are free diving though, you take in a huge gulp of air and then you climb down to the depths of the ocean or wherever you're free diving. But in this case with shooting and modeling, I take in a few deep breaths and let them out, and then right before I get into the water I let out all of my air, or as much as I can. And usually it's this breathing in deeply and breathing out deeply. I feel like I can get out more of my air than I usually can. And then usually I will end up finding that I still have a little bit more air left in me, and I'll slowly let that out as I'm going deeper and deeper into the water, depending on how deep down I want to go. In some cases, in a lot of cases when shooting, no one wants to shoot you too close to the surface and no one wants to shoot you too close to the bottom, so you have to be kind of right in the middle of that water column. So now I've just naturally kept in a little bit of extra air as I'm going down, but in general I try to let it all out before I even get into the water, just so that way I can control my movement and get as deep as I can at the beginning. For your eyes for going underwater, some people can open their eyes underwater and some people just can't, and it's really scary. But usually if you find that you're having a harder time opening your eyes underwater, either you might have dry eye issues, or the pool or whatever water that you're in is probably too chlorinated or chemically changed. Usually even in the ocean you won't have too much of a problem with your eyes underwater, unless your eyes are on the drier side, which can be a problem. But some tips and tricks for fixing that, or at least being able to deal with that, is always bringing Visine or liquid tears with you to shoots. So I'll usually do this either before I get in the water or after. Actually, more often I'll just go ahead and put them in both before and after I get in the water. And then I always carry with me eye wash as well, which is a little bit different from liquid tears. So liquid tears adds moisture to your eyes, and eye wash just cleans out your eyes. And I use the eye wash specifically to clean out all of the potential germs or bacteria that's in the water. And that's kind of important not only in the ocean but also in any sort of pools, because you just have no idea what's going to be in there. And even though you don't really need this, it's better safe than sorry, I feel like. So the eye wash really isn't that expensive, and neither are liquid tears. Liquid tears I think are especially important, especially if you do a lot of underwater modeling, or you've been underwater with your eyes open for a long time and you start to experience a lot of cloudiness. It's a sign that your tear ducts have dried up, and so your eyes need new moisture in order to see again. I definitely feel like sometimes modeling as a mermaid can be harder than just modeling underwater without the tail. Especially when you're modeling with the tail, you always have to think about positioning with the tail and making sure that it's showing its best side to the camera, because there have been times where I just look like an eel or a snake underwater because you don't get that full fin effect. And I would say that's definitely the hardest part. That and having the tail bang against the floor or the backdrop of the shoot. But especially when you're not worried about your tail anymore, or your legs and what to do with your legs, a lot of people wonder, well, what do I do with my hands? And underwater you might think, well, trying to swim, trying to stay afloat, but once you've found your buoyancy and you've found your ability underwater, you'll find that you have a lot more control and you can put your hands wherever you kind of feel. I usually try to avoid touching my hair underwater because I feel like it's a little cliche. Maybe if I had longer hair it would look cooler, but with my hair being shorter it kind of either my hands get lost in my hair that's usually everywhere, or it just doesn't always end up looking right. So usually what I do is I try to think of mermaids that I've seen in either the Disney movie or other movies or in photos. So I try to move my hands kind of back and forth. I don't do too much symmetry, just this tends to look too much like a cross, and sometimes bringing your hands closer together, usually I feel like feeling your form a little bit kind of creates a naturalness, feeling against the tail, but it helps a lot to kind of move slowly and kind of use your hands and arms to move with the water, and the water kind of shows you where to put your hands for photos that looks the most natural. So shooting with your hair underwater can make or break a photo, because sometimes you get an amazing photo but your hair is completely in your face, or it's doing just one of these crazy swoops off to the side. So one of the best ways to kind of control your hair underwater is either to have someone else do it for you, especially if you have longer hair. It can be easier to place your hair under the water, and it'll pretty much stay there. Hair is really good about just kind of staying naturally with the water's buoyancy already. But if you have shorter hair like I do, and even this trick works as well with longer hair, it's just kind of shaking your hair a little bit back and forth as if there's a wind or a breeze. Usually I'll bob my head a little bit forward, and if you do it even ever so lightly, your hair will just kind of flow back behind you or to the side and get out of your face without having to use your hands. I found that using your hands to move your hair underwater, unless you're moving the very ends of it, ends up just kind of getting a lot of photos of your hands and your face, and doesn't end up moving your hair nearly as much as you would think it would.
Then thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. We'll put all the information if you want more information about Astrid, and also we'll be giving a workshop, then you can go check out what she's doing, and let us know if you have any question about this and we'll answer it. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye!
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you hit that subscribe button and keep watching more mermaid videos just like this one.